Can you imagine a story I heard about a fellow that had just found faith in God? I mean, it had been there the whole time, but finally God found him, and it changed his life. And everywhere he turned, he was sharing his faith. Kind of reminded me of my experience Wednesday night with Jen Welch leading us in the Zion 400 class, Sharing Jesus Without Fear. What a terrific class. I'm glad that there were several of us that were there together, and I don't know if I have the liberty of doing this, Jen. Oh, she's nodding. To invite you to come late. We'll catch up with each other. I'll loan you mine or copy you my first session, but come Wednesday night. You'll be so glad you did. But like the fellow on the video, who is the author of this book and whose life God changed dramatically and who has shared his faith thousands of times with thousands of people. Well, this fellow went out in his neighborhood, and no less than 63 people in a week's time. He reached 63 people who, after he shared his faith, they too dedicated their life to Jesus Christ, and they came to church with him that next Sunday. Well, after church, the chairman of the evangelism committee went up to the pastor. He said, "Pastor, that guy's not even on our evangelism committee." Sorry, Joshua. Sorry, John. You're good guys. And God used you greatly, but you kind of missed the point here. You got all confused about the them and us. And sorry, Steve, and sorry, Zion, if we start to look at others who look different, and sound different, maybe smell different, and so they're not one of us, and so we don't invite them. See, we read in the Bible, and Jesus says, invite them. I wish that all of the people had God's Spirit within them and could cast out demons. Hadn't Jesus just said a couple of chapters, a couple of weeks ago, a couple of sermons ago, to Peter, on this confession I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That's what we're in the business of doing, of storming the gates of hell. So today, having opened the book and heard that gospel call to invite others, we also hear Jesus describe the way that people can come to know him as they see our deeds rather than memorize our creeds. The words he warns us there about in verse Mark chapter 9 here in the gospel reading, verse 41, "For truly I tell you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you bear the name of Christ will by no means lose the reward." Maybe that's talking, first of all, about how we treat others inside the church. They recognize that we are inside the church, and they give us a cup of water. In case you missed it, this is Professional Church Workers Appreciation Month or week. I got greeted today as being appreciated, and someone sent me a little notice. And I certainly want to include Jen Welch, our early childhood center director, and Rebecca Duport, our family life minister, and certainly give God thanks for all of our paid and volunteer retired pastors who serve alongside Pastor Peter and myself. And I hope you join me in thanking God for these men and women God has sent us to help equip and train us. And I'm sorry, Marion, I don't want to exclude you today. We'll give you a parish nurses day too, but you're part of our ministry, and we love and appreciate you as well as our parish nurse. But this is not about honoring the golf pro at the country club. This is about all of us recognizing that we have been given the greatest gift in all the world. In fact, Jesus shows how serious this is. First of all, in verse 42, he talks about children and how vital it is that nothing get in the way of them coming to him. Remember him a couple of weeks ago? Was it just last week? We heard him say, he brought the little child in his lap and said, unless you become like one of these, you're not going to enter the kingdom. And so here he takes on the negative and says, if any of you, verse 42, put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better if a great millstone were hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. Stop throwing barriers that affect people's faith negatively. Not just children, but those who are new to the faith. Part of my reading this week in a book called Winning on Purpose by John Edmund Kaiser made a little note that said, please keep in mind that the disciples were called the disciples from the very first day that Jesus called them on the shore. And so I think we sometimes make out if someone is a disciple or a member that somehow they're spiritual giants, and that's the purpose of the church, is to gather and feed and manage the disciples. But the purpose of the church is going back to invite to make new disciples. And Jesus says one way you can do that is by stopping being a stumbling block for them. And secondly, if you, in verse 41, offer that cup of water not just to your fellow disciple, but how do we treat others outside the church? I heard one pastor, I read his story recently about his own father growing up. Quite the opposite of my grandfather, and my father too, who loves the Lord and has been a positive influence on me. I don't get too emotional about it or anything, but this poor pastor's dad, what a burden it was for him during his childhood and then his own faith walk with God and then serving the Lord as a pastor, to know that his own father stiff-armed God. He was cynical. He was convinced that the only thing the church wanted was another member and another pledge. And that was his story. That was his, every time that their church had a revival, had some Bring a Friend Sunday, his mother, he and his brothers and sisters would beg Dad to come. But for whatever reason, God knows what stumbling block somebody put in his way. Not that somebody has to be blamed for this, but he always said no. All they want is another member and another pledge.